So the Atlanta Hawks just beat the New York Knicks last night in Madison Square Garden to advance to the semifinals and go to Las Vegas for the Emirates NBA Cup. And over the offseason, not a lot of people would expect the Atlanta Hawks to be this fun and to beat this many good amount of teams that are playoff locks or playoff perennial teams. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Hawks' growth. We're going to see how they fare up in the future and look at some of their young talent. So before we get started, we have to do some type of backstory where the Atlanta Hawks sent over Danilo Gallinari, a 2023 first-round pick, a 2025 first-round pick, a 2026 pick swap, and a 2027 first-round pick over to get DeJounte Murray and Jacques Landale from the San Antonio Spurs. After the Atlanta Hawks' recent postseason success, it was only right for them to believe that they needed a second star next to Trae Young so they could actually get more consistent, more reliable playoff success. And obviously, this trade came with its concerns. DeJounte Murray was another ball-dominant guard next to Trae Young. And the defender you thought he would be, that he was with the Spurs, he just was not anymore due to the uptick in volume of scoring. So after the Atlanta Hawks wanted to give this one more season with DeJounte Murray and try and build around the right pieces, but they ended up missing the playoffs and falling out of the play-in. And there were some really big conversations about which guard should the Atlanta Hawks build around. Should they trade Trae Young so they can get more assets? There was a lot of him getting mocked to go to the San Antonio Spurs because the San Antonio Spurs have their pick and they would love to get their pick back. But DeJounte Murray was not the better player than Trae Young, and you do not get a type of talent like Trae Young every day or every single season in the draft. So the Atlanta Hawks went on to move DeJounte Murray. This trade consisted of the Atlanta Hawks receiving Dyson Daniels, E.J. Liddell, Larry Nance Jr., Cody Zeller, a 2025 first-round pick from the Los Angeles Lakers, and a 2027 first-round pick from the least favorable of the Bucks or the Pelicans. And not to mention, the Atlanta Hawks lucked out in the draft and got the number one pick. And we don't see a lot of seasons where getting the number one pick is really unlucky. There was a lot of conversation saying that this was the worst year to get the number one pick in the draft of the past 5 seasons. Because in 2020, we had Anthony Edwards. 2021, we had Cade Cunningham. 2022, we had Paolo Banchero. 2023, we had Victor Wembanyama. And 2025, we have Cooper Flagg. And in 2024, they stuck with the number one pick and picked up Zachary Risacher, who just does not have that eye-popping talent that a lot of number one picks would have, and doesn't really have that superstar upside that the past 5 years of number one draft picks have had. And since we're on the subject, we might as well start with him. I think Zachary Risacher has been pretty solid if you forget the fact that he's a number one pick. I think Zachary Risacher has really shown some signs on defense, and he's a really good transition player. Now, the jump shot has not been falling, and that's kind of what you drafted him for, a guy that can sit in the corner, be a lengthy 3-and-D type of player who can maybe attack a closeout every now and then, kind of the perfect role player to play next to Trae Young. And I think he's been doing everything that you would want him to do to start out. It's just as soon as the jump shot starts falling and the touch around the rim gets a little bit better, you're going to see him as a very good role player next to Trae Young. And I think the biggest concern of the Atlanta Hawks over the entire offseason was the future. That's why people jumped to a Trae Young to the San Antonio Spurs mock trade, because that was the only really deal that made sense for the Atlanta Hawks, because the San Antonio Spurs had their draft picks for the next 2 seasons or next 2 to 3 seasons. So if you could send Trae Young to pair up with a dominant big and Victor Wembanyama, it makes sense for both sides. The Atlanta Hawks get their picks back because they have been unsuccessful in the playoffs over the past few seasons, and the San Antonio Spurs get their second star, somebody who can really set the floor for Victor Wembanyama. But the Atlanta Hawks didn't do that. And a lot of people were thinking that the Atlanta Hawks were just going to try and ride out this play-in type of run and be a really mediocre team. We've seen teams over the past few seasons be mediocre and not really choose whether they want to tank or whether they want to go all in. And for example, the Chicago Bulls have been a team that's been towards the bottom of the Eastern Conference playoff standings for the past few seasons with not getting the best draft help. So everyone thought that the Atlanta Hawks were about to go down that path, which is one of the worst paths in the NBA. But this season is different, and it doesn't really show that on their record. They're 14-12. But when we look at the Atlanta Hawks and say, this is a solid team, this is something you can build off of. Dyson Daniels looks like he's going to be an all-NBA caliber player this season. Trae Young, even though he's been extremely inefficient, has been leading this team to be solid enough to get these wins against really good teams. They've beaten teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Los Angeles Lakers. They've beaten the New York Knicks, and they've beaten the Boston Celtics without Trae Young. So I wanted to look at some of the stats against these really good teams to see what's the outlier. What are they doing against these really good teams that can edge out these wins? Against the Los Angeles Lakers, they had an offensive rating of 116.5. Against the Milwaukee Bucks, they had an offensive rating of 114.4. Against the Cavs, in both of their games, they had an offensive rating of 113.6 and an offensive rating of 128.6. Against the New York Knicks, they had an offensive rating of 122.2. Against the Celtics, they had an offensive rating of 117. Against the Kings, they had an offensive rating of 112.4. And in overall, that is an offensive rating of 117.8. That is a total offensive rating that is good enough to be fourth in the NBA, right above the Dallas Mavericks and right below the Boston Celtics. So in totality, they are a plus 6.5 in offensive rating against these really good teams. Over the past 8 games, the Atlanta Hawks are 7-1, and they have a top 10 defense and they're top 10 in net rating. And throughout this entire video, I haven't even mentioned Jalen Johnson, who's been playing phenomenal this season. Jalen Johnson this season is averaging about 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 assists a night. He's also been phenomenal as a transition player and an offensive rebounder and a playmaker for this Hawks team. And I think the Atlanta Hawks truly have the best defensive team around Trae Young, which is not a high bar. The Atlanta Hawks are still a middle-of-the-pack offensive team. And I think so far, the Atlanta Hawks have the best defensive team they had around Trae Young in his entire era. And that's not a high bar. The Atlanta Hawks are still a middle-of-the-pack defensive team. But you can tell that the personnel change has been extremely significant, and they might have a blueprint for the future. With Jalen Johnson being athletic as he is on the perimeter, Zachary Reese-Sachet being able to recover and attack closeouts pretty well, with DeAndre Hunter really breaking out this season and playing the way that he's been playing, you have a bunch of athletic guys on the perimeter, guys like Dyson Daniels, guys like DeAndre Hunter, guys like Jalen Johnson, guys like Zachary Reese-Sachet. You pair that all around Trae Young so you can try and hide him as much as you possibly can. And Trae Young is not a good defender whatsoever, but he's been showing the effort, which really puts these guys in the position to play defense in the best possible way they can. And when I look at this Atlanta Hawks team and when I look at the Trae Young era and this team, they're not really there's not really anything that pops out. They're a middle of the pack offense and a middle of the pack defense. I look at this Atlanta Hawk team. Over the past 8 games, they are the best rebounding team in the league. They're also 8-5 in clutch scenarios. Half of their games have been clutch scenarios, and they have the 5th highest win percentage out of all teams. So when we have a extremely talented offensive guard who can get the best out of any situation that you bring forth to him, even if he has been inefficient, you can count on him in these clutch scenarios to carry through a offense that can win you games. And now you have a defense that is capable of getting stops, getting turnovers, and getting out in the break and really being effective in the transition. There's a lot of formulas for them to win. And we're saying all of this as of Trae Young not being inefficient. If he fixes that and he is hitting his shots like he normally does. Now, the shot selection is a little bit shaky and the rim pressure can be a little shaky as well. But if he can hit his shots at a normal clip that Trae Young can, this is going to be a very dangerous team. Right now, the Atlanta Hawks sit at the 7th seed, and they are 1.5 game back from the 4th seed, and they have a 3-game difference on the 8th seed. If the standings continue to stay like this, the Atlanta Hawks have a really good shot if they keep this hot streak going, or they can keep building up hot streaks throughout the season, because when we look at it, the Orlando Magic just lost Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. They're probably going to fall in the standings. I think there is a way the Atlanta Hawks can be a top 6 seed in the Eastern Conference, and they can build off of this formula that they're building. And if we talk about them building on the scenario that they're building, they have a bunch of young players. They have guys like Zachary Reese-Sachet, who is 19 years old. They have Trae Young, who's 26 years old. They have Jalen Johnson, who is 21 years old. They have Dyson Daniels, who is 21 years old. And they still have 3 first-round picks throughout the next 3 seasons that they can use to carry out this formula. You have a 2025 Sacramento 1 through 12 protected. And if you think that Sacramento can really pick it up and either get to the play-in or fall just short of the play-in and maybe get the 14th pick in the draft, you could be set. You have the Los Angeles Lakers pick, who's probably going to make the playoffs, but I'm pretty sure you can say that they aren't going to make it past the first round. And then you have a pick in 2027 that is from the Bucks or the New Orleans Pelicans, whoever is worse in that season. And you can always count on the Bucks being like, you know what, we're really old. We're probably going to trade Dame, and I don't know how much longer Giannis is going to be there. Or you'll have a New Orleans Pelicans pick whose season is really unpredictable due to their injury history. By this time, when you do get your picks back in 2028, you'll have a 22-year-old Zachary Reese-Sachet, a 29-year-old Trae Young, a 25-year-old Jalen Johnson, and a 24-year-old Dyson Daniels. you will still have your core players at the peak of their powers on top of the draft picks that you guys are accumulating with guys that can be moved like Clint Capella and Larry Nance Jr. Both of these guys are coming off the books next offseason as well. So now you have the leverage to ship these guys out to teams that might be desperate. The Denver Nuggets need a backup center desperately. They would love to have a Clint Capella or a Larry Nance Jr. The Lakers desperately need some size. They would love to have a Clint Capella or a Larry Nance Jr. So in conclusion, I think the Atlanta Hawks are truly building something that is worth being excited about if you are an Atlanta Hawks fan. Trae Young is still one of the best playmakers in the league, and he's been one of the best playmakers in the league. And now you really round that up with a future all-star in Jalen Johnson and two high-level role players in DeAndre Hunter and Zachary Reese-Shea if they can continue on this path. I think the Atlanta Hawks are extremely dangerous, and they're only going to get better. If you guys like this type of content, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you guys want to find me on TikTok, it is at @TheBuzzerSports. For business inquiries, @TheBuzzerSportsENT@gmail.com. And with that being said, leave a like, don't forget to subscribe, and I'm out. Peace.